Welcome to No Question About That. This is United Inc., our monthly, weekly, bi-weekly finance show with Jamie, also known as Subprime Goals on the socials. I'm Ed. How's it going, Jamie?
We had a bit of positivity last time, and it feels like the run is continuing. Some more good news stories, which is always nice to speak about.
Yep, Sir Jim swinging his brutal axe and firing everyone he could get hold of has borne some fruit, at least financially, at least. Definitely. Hasn't quite caught up on the pitch. It was interesting. You did a thread, Swedish Rumble did a thread, I think Uberguna, Magic Hat did a thread on the financials. And it's as much a financial story as it is a kind of corporate reset story, this one, isn't it? Like restructuring how the club thinks about what it is. So after years of failing to be in the Champions League or being in one out of every 2 years, basically at best, but living on a Champions League diet, they've now decided to completely reset it, and it's borne some pretty immediate fruit. So today we're going to go through the Q3 report, which is a kind of interim one. We'll get the full yearly one in a quarter's time or so. See what the full picture is. We'll go through the top line revenue, the cost structure of the club, new cost structure, and just how much that will be impacted by United's summer transfer activity, and a few other things like how much we can spend and whether Sir Jim will buy the women's team yet. Because he's allowed to. He won't. We can talk through that one. So how are you anyway?
Yeah, good. I've been doing lots of traveling recently, and it feels like it's somewhat catching up. And next week I'm off to Scotland, so it's not slowing down. I've been to sunnier climes so far this year, but the weather doesn't look too promising for Scotland. So I'm playing a round or two of golf, and nice. I think I'm going to get the true Scottish test.
Playing St Andrews?
Sadly not. That one's a bit. I think there's a lot of American tourists and maybe even Asian tourists who are fully booked out St Andrews at the moment. So we're doing the other coast, Troon, Arran, and over to Machrihanish as well. So getting some nice sights in.
Well, if you're going over to the West Coast, yeah, little trip to Islay and taste some whiskey. No,
that might also be on the cards. Yeah. That I'm in the process of persuading the friends I'm going with. Just take another island hop. Yeah, get a wee dram.
I did master's degree up in Scotland, so took in as much of the mountains and lakes and whiskey as I possibly could for that year. So yeah, very remote, well worth it. Does Sir Jim own a distillery? He feels like the kind of guy I'd like to have an upmarket distillery.
I don't know his financial investments that well to know that.
Got a chemicals plant in Scotland. It was dubbed the most polluting company in Europe.
Yeah, so, we might be trying to stay away from that one.
Yeah. All right, top stuff. United released their quarterlies on Friday. It was almost universally good news as far as you could get good news from a club that isn't going to be in the Champions League next year. So, the top line?
Yes. So overall, the results were pretty positive, and I'd say, the revenue was for the 3 months from Jan to March was up 17%. A lot of that was driven by the on-pitch performance, as well as a little bit in terms of sponsorship income coming through. You then had a big change in the cost base, and the big thing which has caught everyone's attention, and rightly so, is wages. And that was down 22% versus the same period last year. In monetary value, that's a £20 million reduction overall. So pretty sizable in one quarter. And it's not a number that you tend to see kind of across any company being, cost down that much. And what's driven that? Well, obviously, there's been some pretty wide-ranging cuts in terms of headcount. There was obviously the redundancy program that was announced, I think, towards the end of last year. There was one that was announced and has just been completed, or is in the process of being completed at the moment. Those are obviously kind of key drivers. The one that's going to be mainly impacted these set of numbers is the one last year.
Yeah.
But the real big new news, I think, is the impact of restructuring the men's playing squad. Now, there was a note in the financial release talking about the transfer activity in January being a key driver of this. And if you dig in a little bit more detail, you can start to kind of potentially frame some of the impact of this. You've got Rashford, Antony, and Malacia, who are all loaned out. Now, on an annual basis, someone like a Rashford costs around about £19 million per year to Manchester United. So that's his wage costs, and then when you add on employer taxes that you have to pay. So per quarter, that's about £4.8 million. If you remember in the prior year, obviously we were in the Champions League, as you mentioned, one of those, every biannual occurrence of United being in the Champions League. Players like Rashford and many players in the squad, and this being reported widely, get a pay increase when we're in the Champions League. So last year, he would have cost United about £24 million a year. So there's a big £5 million difference approximately. That 24 million last year equates to 6 million per quarter. So already there's like a 1.2 million difference there. If you actually then think, well, we've loaned out Rashford and Aston Villa are covering at least 75% of his wages, 4.8 million per quarter for this year actually turns down to 1.2. So actually the difference that you need to be looking at is a 6 million per quarter wage for Rashford versus 1.2 million realised this quarter. So on Rashford alone, United could be saving about 5 million per quarter.
Yeah.
And if we're thinking about that quarterly run rate, that's a quarter on its own of the 20 million reduction for this quarter. Yeah. United were running at 10 million per quarter, roughly, in reductions. So like Rashford is half of the new incremental amount. If you add in Antony and Malacia on top, you can start to see the transformative impact of like removing some of these high earners from the books.
It's the irony of the restructuring, or I don't know, curiosity maybe is a better way of thinking about it, that only a few players make up hundreds of staff in terms of their financial impact. I mean, so I think in Q2 United, it was a year-over-year 13% reduction in the overall employee benefits. So that's everybody. Yeah. And then and no clubs break this out anymore. Maybe Aston Villa do. I think I'm right in saying that clubs used to break it out, or the UEFA report, landscape report used to break it, which is everyone's baseline from 2022. Like, okay, we'll take the ratios. What does it look like? And then 22% year over year this year, as you said. I mean, it's a massive restructuring. I worked for an organisation in the pandemic where we burned £200 million overnight. A very specific organisation. That requires some pretty rapid restructuring, but it took us 9 months to do that kind of restructure, and it's pretty difficult. Employment laws and legality of consulting processes, payoffs, assessment of who's valuable and who is not, and what they're doing. And every CFO on the planet wants to just put a red line through everything, and every strategist like me is like, no, let's work out who's actually good at doing what. And you actually try and do both here, right? Which is to go like, who's providing us value for money, playing staff or non-playing staff, and how should we assess them versus our peers and our financial performance, right? And so this is the process they've gone through. It's really brutal. We're seeing it in playing terms as well, I think, with some decision making that will be part playing about Amorim's playing needs and partly financial. With Garnacho, I think everyone's confirming that he is definitely leaving, for example. But yeah, it's a massive restructure. Also gives you an indication what United still have to do, because of those players that left, Anthony, with quite some irony, I'd say, is the easiest to sell. Malacia, low, we need £5 million or something like that to break even PSR. Surely someone will pay that. I don't think it's been confirmed he's going to stay at PSV. Rashford's probably the hardest just because of the wage package, even though he would provide the most benefit financially. Sancho will be an interesting one. I wonder whether we'll get into a situation later in the summer where we just negotiate a payoff for that final year of his contract. It's not what we'd want, but every other club will be looking at that and going, cheap loan on August the 31st, or pay him off so he's a freebie. But it just like shows the whole process, right? And what they've had to do and how hard it is to turn this massive tanker around.
Yeah, and look, I think we've discussed in previous pods. Like I think the way this restructuring has occurred, I think it has been brutal. And look, like I'm a finance guy, and I realize that there are sometimes harsh realities. But when you're talking about a football club, would you like to do it in the right way? Absolutely. But I think this point about the impact of the players on the financials is really pertinent, right? Like those restructuring this squad is the hardest thing to do, and if you get it wrong, is like the most costly thing to do. And so, whilst it doesn't necessarily sit right with me or a lot of other people, the kind of cultural reset that a lot of people have talked about, it's not just about the first team squad, men's squad. It is the whole organization. And so I think that's kind of my reading of what's been going on is like, it is a 2-part process. And it's like, right, okay, we'll do the things that we can do really quickly to try and, clear the decks, so to speak, which I think that's where the non-football staff have been heavily impacted. And I think what we're seeing now, and I think what I'm hoping to see this summer, is that same ruthlessness with the men's squad.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a truism, I think, in football. I mean, I think the guys who did Soccernomics years ago, the book, which I'm sure you've read, back front to back, and all of that, said there was something 90-something% or 0.92 R ratio between wages and success, whatever that means, right? So United will not win the Premier League on this kind of wage budget, which will be sub 200 million. It would be it'd be Leicester-esque, effectively. I mean, they had an even lower wage budget, but so the first part of this process is to restructure it to live within our means right now, get the decisions right. That's why this summer is so important from a playing point of view, but also a financial point of view. The recruitment has to be right so that the next round of recruitment isn't about offloading underperformers who are on massive wages and taking a haircut on all those deals, going after the players you really want and flexing the financial muscle that will be there. I mean, I don't know whether you mentioned it, but the guided EBITDA up from like 140 to 150, which it has been for like as long as I can remember, hovering around that number, to 180 to 190, right? That is a level of free cash flow that 2/3 of the Premier League can't even claim as revenues, and it's so this gives it a sense, even in a period of financial downturn for United, just what a behemoth this club is. And so they can get the decisions right, the path towards being a success again, you can see it ahead of you.
Totally. And they're almost in such a position where they don't need to get every decision right. If they get the majority of decisions right, United in 2-3 years' time are going to be in a much better place than what they were. And, I've talked about in the past, like building solid foundations, like just do that. Just do that well. And all of a sudden things will start to turn around, like this. I'd been almost a little bit dismissive about the impact of loaning high wage players, but actually like seeing this come through and actually like doing the numbers on it, it makes you realize that actually, with the PSR headroom that United do have, actually the amount of cash that you can save by loaning a Rashford, loaning a Sancho, is pretty significant, as long as you reinvest it wisely.
Yeah, it has to be reinvested wisely, and sales will be as important part of this process as loans or purchases, and we should weight them all equally. I think there is a tendency amongst fans, of course, to be excited about the shiny new thing. Who's excited about a big sale? Like, no one. But it'll be very important to get the biggest possible price for Alejandro Garnacho. It's obviously, as has become the common parlance, pure profit. Quite sure what that really means. It's not a financial term, but it will it'll be loaded all onto this year's, or this year and next year and the year afterwards, like PSR calculation, but can be used all now if the club wants to, as long as they match it with revenues in years 2 and 3. But it's very important to get the biggest number possible because of the multiplier effect of it, like not having to, like it all being profit, basically. Same with Rashford. That's a much harder deal to do because of his wages, obviously, and I'm quite nervous about if he really is interested in Barcelona, exactly what shenanigans they will get up to leave it as late as possible for that one. But we'll see. But yeah, United just have to be very, very good at selling. Of course, the next phase of that, which won't come this summer, is to make really good deals for younger players as well that aren't considered. Oh, which actually may turn into a real benefit this summer because of the Alvaro Fernandez Carreras sell-on clause going from Benfica to Real Madrid, and also possibly Anthony Elanga going to Newcastle. Thank you very much, Newcastle, for funding our deal for Brian Mbueno. Very nice of you.
Exactly. And I think like all of this speaks, I think, to that cash position that we've talked about a lot in the past.
Yeah.
Cash is like now at only 75 million. There has been a top up on the credit facility, but the way cash works, like it's kind of like out of one bank account into another sort of thing.
Yes.
I think the sales is obviously a really good thing for that, but also there was something going through the full financial report, which I noticed, which seemed slightly, I wouldn't say unusual, but it caught my eye, which was there was an upswing in receivables of about 35 million from December. Now, I kind of did a little bit of trawling back and forth, and if I look at the same periods last year, it actually went down by about 30 million. So United haven't talked to what drove that, but I think the nature of that upswing in receivables will be pretty interesting in terms of what it will mean for cash and transfer window ahead. My guess is it's to do with season ticket sales, prize money, and maybe sponsorship income. If it's to do with sponsorship income, that's great news.
United didn't announce a new sponsor. I mean, there's the Qualcomm extension.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether they might have paid some up front and be unusual, but maybe they did. It's a long-term deal. I guess they are seeing value from that.
Yes.
It's the right kind of brand to get that kind of global brand recognition. So, obviously B2B chips that go into, they sell their chips to phone OEMs. That's how Qualcomm make their money. Well, and 50% licensing. It's very sad. I've done a lot of work for Qualcomm over the years. Not extremely nerdy people in that company, but extremely profitable. And so if they want to pay us more money and upfront, awesome, more power to them. Yeah.
Totally, because I think the one thing that I think hasn't got much attention, but is still very much pertinent, is the net transfer fees that United owe in the next year.
Yeah.
That climbed up again a little bit to 308 million. Whilst it's great that the costs are starting to come down, a lot of those aren't permanent because they are loanees. It shows what we can do if we get the sales right.
Well,
but then we've still got to pay off this 308 million. So another reason why the sales are going to be super important.
And Mateus Cunha makes that a little more problematic because of the nature of the payment schedule, which is basically over 2 years, 3 payments over 2 years. It's
pretty steep,
suboptimal. Yeah, Brian Mbueno, if he joins, will presumably be on a 5-year payment schedule, like most transfers or something. Yeah, it might be front loaded, which is fairly common, right? So it just won't be Harry Maguire-esque where we pay it all in one lump sum up front.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, that transfer bill will take some time to I think, roll through as well. And I think like one of the questions I think we've both been getting asked quite a lot is this: how long could a full financial turnaround take? Being, putting on my nerd hat as well. And if you look at, cash metrics to assess businesses like near-term financial strength, something, sometimes called like current ratio or a quick ratio, that sort of stuff, it kind of implies like where United have operated in the past. If you take that sort of ratio, they should have 400 to 450 in the bank. Obviously, we've got 75 at the moment. So like, where do you get that 350 million from? Obviously, the shortcut is external investment. We've talked at length in the past about how, there's a few steps that need to happen first on the ownership structure before that probably happens. But I think the other good thing that the results point to is that if we can have a good transfer window in terms of selling players, the EBITDA margin and the free cash flow that you need to be able to kind of generate the cash is probably not that far out of sight. The latest guidance, as you pointed out, like a 28% EBITDA margin. In the past, United have operated at about 35%, hit highs of 40%. If you're still generating around 700 million in revenue over a 3-year basis and you're operating at a 35% EBITDA margin, which with all the cuts that are happening doesn't feel completely bonkers, you're going to be generating about 245, 250 million in EBITDA. Take off your, 120 net transfer spend each year. All of a sudden, you could see in how 2 or 3 years we'll start to being in that position, and then, using the scale advantages that you've talked about in the past.
Yeah. No, I think you're right on the kind of how the financial structure of the club looks for that kind of turnaround. That then hand in hand with that is the PSR turnaround, of course, right? And they are two different metrics. You noted the athletics piece this week, so Mark Critchley has been digging into some of that here. I guess his new insight was the how exactly they structure between the UK company, the group holding company, the Cayman Islands proposition, and the New York Stock Exchange listed company, and just where some of those costs lie, which was interesting. I didn't know exactly how they'd structured it. I don't know how he found out all that information. So a lot of digging, right?
Got a lot of, it must have a great friend in United's finance department.
Yeah. Or someone who's rather disgruntled.
Well,
They've walked out the door with some pieces of paper. Yeah.
Exactly. I like the interesting thing there actually also, I think alongside it's how it's structured is what costs are and are not included in PSR calculations. They made a point in that article, which I completely agree with. It's like whatever PSR number you see in terms of headroom, it's an estimate. Like I will happily hold my hands up and say like, I know I'm not right, but I think I might be in the ballpark. And I think the fact that the deal costs weren't included, the investor relations costs aren't included in the PSR cost. And then also, interestingly, the unhedged FX gains and losses on the debt, I think that's like new incremental news, because I think there's always been a bit of nervousness about exchange rate fluctuations.
Yeah. Especially since United's income is in pounds and euros and debt is in dollars. So that can cause, especially, and United would not be holding a lot of cash in dollars, right? There's no real reason to do that. In many international companies, you would do it just to hedge, right? It's good CFO practice, as you would know better than me. But it's very hard for United to do that, I think. Yeah, on the PSR and what is included and what's not, it's very opaque. They don't publish all the rules. I think it would be very useful for fans and most definitely the nation's fourth estate to have those published. Would help everyone, especially Luke Edwards, but less about him. But banking costs and the cost of the transaction, one would say, through just common logic, should not be included in your PSR costs, right?
Yeah.
£35 million that the Glazers spent on their lawyers and the Rain Group should not mean that United have to buy one player less. This is not a financial advantage that United have gained here.
No, like, I mean, it does make me think, like, United being publicly listed, it's kind of a competitive disadvantage.
For sure, yeah.
Like,
yeah.
It does not benefit United in any other way, shape, or form other than to have raised funds for transfers or outgoing dividends, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So the only advantage, if you can call it an advantage, is it's easier to raise capital. I mean, basically. But what Sir Jim will do a microsecond after he gains control of the club is to take it, delist it. 100% for sure.
Yeah.
I would bet everything on that and you'd get very short odds. So.
And like the only reason United would ever really need to raise capital is to basically deal with the debt, which they didn't used to have.
Yes, and when you have Sir Jim's extremely large wallet, when he eventually takes control, whatever time period that is, then we won't need to worry about, or at least not in the same way anyway. I suspect we'll get a refinancing next time out, and then we'll see. All right, so what does it mean for the rest of the transfer window then? You know, we're all making guesstimates on the PSR headroom. It looks perfectly fine this year. Next year might be, well, depending on what sales happen this summer and purchases, might be a little more difficult. I guess there's a bit of a bet that we make European football of some kind.
Yeah, I think there's probably two bets to consider. One, European football of some kind and an improving league position, which, you know, if we get anywhere close to the target of 6th that's been stated by United for next season, like the loss of Europa League revenue is going to be completely offset just from improved Premier League income. I think the other bet is you can generate some profit on sales and cash. And I think, yeah, you've raised this point in the past, like squad size is going to be an important thing. Like, I would be surprised if United had more incomings than they did outgoings.
Oh, for sure.
And so if that, you know, even on relatively cautious maths, that will therefore mean that you're going to have more PSR headroom going forward. Because despite reports, I find it very hard to believe with all of the changes that have happened so far that United are going to be inflating the wage bill of the men's first team at this point in time.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I know there's a lot of reporting about what Matthias Cunha and Brian Bueno, if he agrees to join, might be on. I mean, there's also been some very credible, and I kind of believe it, even if it is anecdotal, reporting that they will not pay anyone above 200,000 a week. In the current environment, that makes a lot of sense. That would, by the way, be a 4x increase in Brian Bueno's weekly salary. I think he'd be all right with that somehow.
Yeah.
If he's already nominally agreed to join. So yes, I think they'll work on a smaller squad. I mean, one of the interesting questions, which, you know, we've posited a little bit on some on the pod in other shows, is like how much Ruben Amorim will be prepared to trust in young players and what the strategy looks like now. That looks a bit different without, like, there's one scenario where you have 10 Europa League games to play and some of them against absolute dross where you can play some younger players. It's quite difficult doing that unless you really trust them in the Premier League where every game is ultra competitive.
Yeah.
And I mean, especially since 2 of the games against promoted side next season are going to be against Leeds, you'd expect them to be extremely competitive as well. So we're going to have, you know, 35 games or something next season that are very, very competitive indeed. Hard to throw 18-year-olds in who are untested into that one. So much more likely he works with a core squad of, say, 20, which is supplemented by Aidan Heaven and Chido Obi and Lenny Yoro as the younger players, rather than that being like 7 or 8 younger players. Which means that if we assume that Rashford, Sancho, Anthony and Malacia all go in addition to Lindelof and Eriksson, and who else went?
Evans.
Johnny Evans. How could I forget Johnny Evans? Yeah. And we'll see what happens with Tom Heaton, whether he signs a coaching contract, which will be substantially lower wages, one would imagine. Then, yeah, if it's 3 or 4 purchases and a couple of sales, in addition to the ones I mentioned, Garnacho being one, we'll see what happens with Andre Onana, I'm sure, and Rasmus Højlund, who they've been marketing for 8 months now. And we'll see if we can trick anyone into paying up for him.
Hey, well, Inter need to replenish their squad. They got an average squad age of 29.
Yep.
Bit of Champions League money to line their pockets.
They've got a big hole burning their pockets there to spend on Rasmus. 38.5 million is our break even. Should be doable, maybe.
But I'd love to, nothing against Rasmus, but I think it would be good for us. And I like on this point about the makeup of the squad. Yeah, I think I've talked about a transfer strategy in the past where it's youth prospects, emerging talent, and then kind of like the marquee signings. They've actually gone so far like 2, in my eyes, marquee signings. And Mbeumo and Cunha, I think they've kind of gone past that kind of youthful prospect stage. I think it might mean that we see a few more players that are maybe a bit on the younger side and maybe for the future. I think for me, squad balance, age profile wise, you can't have too many young players. I think it's just too much to ask, particularly when I think the reality of the situation is the financials do require us to do better in the league next year. So putting all of your eggs in that basket, I think it doesn't do them any favours. It doesn't do Amorim any favours. And I also don't think it does, the leadership above him any favours. It just puts them in a position where the odds are probably stacked against them and they don't, we kind of need to carry on this positive, I say positive momentum, start of some positive momentum.
Yeah, to that point, there is, the age profile is not bad in the squad, if you think about it. I mean, so we've Ahmad, Heaven, Yoro, Dorgu, and as younger players, I guess Garnacho will be balancing that.
Yeah,
it's going to be leaving. And Bueno and Cunha, as you say, both 25, 26. Yeah, just at the cusp of peak, I guess. But enough headroom there that if it doesn't work out in 2 years' time, you can sell them again and break even on that. I'm not too concerned about that. Talk of Gyökeres worries me both from a football point of view, but definitely from a financial point of view. He will be 27 next year. 5-year contract, big fee, mega wages, no prospect of a resale, really no prospect of selling him on. If you look at where his profile of where he's come from, and 2, if that deal was done, no prospect of selling him on if he fails, really, for anything other than a big loss. It's an extremely risky deal, that one, from a number of aspects. Has my spidey sense tingling that I don't like it. And that's nothing against the player. I'm sure he's a perfectly good player. And it's not really even a football comment. If he scores 30 goals and manages to do the very rare thing, which is translate a non-top 7 league to, probably the hardest league in Europe, and just straight lines his performance across, then no problem. It's all awesome. It doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Whilst there is a lot of chat about it, it would seem somewhat out of kilter with the overall strategy so far. And I guess, look, this is where compromises need to be made in business sometimes, right? If they want to really, what we don't know is who has been putting forward players like Cunha, like Mbeumo, et cetera, as potential candidates. And if they, if those haven't been Amorim led, maybe there is kind of sometimes you just need to, to give him a bit of faith. You might need to take a risk on this one. It then means, okay, well, if we're taking a risk on this one, we need to be playing it safe on all of the rest through the summer. And look, the time will tell whether that's the right or wrong decision, but I do agree. It seems somewhat out of kilter with the strategy. And when United aren't yet out of the woods financially and they do need to just still ruthlessly execute, it would feel like a slightly odd one.
Yeah. But the simple reason it's different, like similar age profile, similar price, the reason it's different is Cunha and Bueno or Mbuno, whatever we're calling him these days. Still haven't worked that one out.
I think it's Mbumo, and I should actually say someone did message me being like, "Can you tell Ed that it's Mbumo, not Mbeumo?" on Twitter.
Yeah, I haven't heard him say it myself. I couldn't find. I searched the internet. I could not find him saying it.
I'll send you the video. There is a
send me the video. Yeah, perfect. I used to speak pretty fluent French when I was 18. I've lost it all. So, yeah, I mean, they are Premier League proven, right? If you straight line the performance and you get 15 goals out of Cunha and 15 non-penalty goals out of Mbeumo, then we'll be pretty happy with that. And you may say there's a 5 or 10 million, premium paid because we're extracting them out of clubs who didn't have to sell. Then they're fine. You accept that. Gyökeres, who's never performed at a top European league level, may be brilliant, but if he does fail, there's no way of getting him like righting the financial ship as we've seen with Anthony. And I think that's the kind of strategic thinking you need in the transfer market with United, and hopefully we're getting. We should say, but few 1 minor structural change at United with Jason Wilcox officially being appointed director of football. It's basically the role he's been performing now since Christian Vival came in last, or was fully appointed in the winter window. So Vival, head of recruitment, Matt Hargreaves still doing the negotiation, Wilcox now as the director of football, Brother as the CEO. Sir Dave and his marginal gains have gained their way back to France, wherever he spends his time these days. I don't think there are too many tears at Old Trafford about those changes.
No, and I think there's been a lot of reports about, was this planned or not? Like, the one comment I would say is, like, in corporate world, M&A or investments of this type, whether it's private equity world or not, it's not unusual for the acquiring or like the investing entity to have, a person, eyes and ears on the ground, reporting on everything. And those people are never intended to be there for that long. Yeah. He set the kind of mission of, Mission 21 and Mission 1 for the men's and women's teams. Look, we can debate till the cows come home how likely they are in a 3 or 5 year time horizon, but it does feel pretty natural. And look, I think the positive to take away from this is that many fans have been crying for United to have experienced football leadership running the day-to-day operations of the team.
That's what they've got.
And they've now got, and it's now a question of like, how are they as good as they've been made out to be, and can they just continue to execute on it?
Yeah. So a couple other changes I'd look for in the short term is there going to be an appointment on the data side of things? So they lost their head of data and have not replaced him yet. And
there might have been one. Or rumoured, Michael Sansoni, I think, from Mercedes.
Yes, you came from F1. Yeah, that's right. Oh, there you go. So
they've already got that.
So it was in the back of my head somewhere. I knew that one. So that one, and then what happens to the CFO after the turnaround is completed? It won't be within the next 12 months, but I'd imagine at that point, Ineos chap will step away, and we'll see whether that coincides with a ramp up in the amount of stock Ratcliffe owns. Before we go, a couple of interesting tidbits. The Premier League the Premier League clubs, I should say, failed to vote through a proposal, in fact, didn't even take a vote, proposal from the Premier League leadership to close the PSR loophole that Chelsea had discovered, which is to sell the women's team to themselves or to a group company. That's not going to happen at United until Sir Jim has ownership, because it'd be basically handing the Glazers free money. But it's there basically as a way of injecting cash into the company at some point. I would look for Aston Villa who have, the net worth of the owners there is 16 or 17 billion dollars, and Newcastle doing very similar things. Aston Villa could obviously probably move around 100 million, something like that. It'd be easy to justify it. Newcastle a little bit harder since it's not a WSL team. But basically, it's a signal to everyone now that if you have some PSR troubles, you can sell your women's team to yourself.
Yeah. I don't think it's surprising that it didn't go through. I've said it on previous pods. I just hope that United don't go down that route. I think it's very short term.
It is.
We've talked about it being a growth driver long term on a 5, 10, 15-year view. I think to kind of move it out of the corporate structure, it's not very in keeping with being Manchester United.
No, it isn't. I mean, the one thing I'd say is that it's not like... I'm always extremely worried for clubs when, especially EFL clubs, that start selling off their ground. And one of the reasons why that's extremely worrying is that finances right throughout the EFL are extremely precarious, and most clubs run at more than 100% of wage to revenue ratio, and they're basically funded by their owners to some extent. And if the owners get bored, run out of money, as happened at Derby, and then you get separation between the ground and the football club, or as happened at Coventry, and they end up playing in Northampton and stuff like that. That's extremely worrying. Women's team's slightly different. I mean, if it moves to a group company and it's still in the same ownership structure, it can always be moved back later. But yeah, it doesn't feel in keeping with, a one United kind of approach where all these teams are equally important, even if they drive different levels of revenue. But yeah, look for some moves in the Premier League. I mean, Aston Villa need to sell. Basically, if you look at it, their wage ratio is nearly 100%. Or 90 something. They are ambitious owners, shall we say, that didn't make the Champions League this year.
And why they're out of the race for Rashford, effectively.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was always contingent, and may never have been realistic, given if we believe the reports about Rashford's sort of level of personal ambition.
Exactly.
All right, very good. Well, I tell you, the next one we do, next quarterly, will be the annual report. That will give us even more insight into the changes, significantly more insight into the sort of total restructuring, what that looks like. We will get that around about September.
I think it's usually after the summer transfer window, for fairly obvious reasons. And actually, I think there's one thing to look out for. We obviously talked about the redundancy costs that came first half of the year. One point from the interim report is we did get a number for the redundancy. The latest round of redundancy costs was a little bit higher than the last one. So around about 9 million in total. I think primarily because there was more senior staff members that left during this round. So there could be, some further non-football cost benefits that we start to see coming through that might be reflected in the EBIT, a good EBITDA guidance for next year.
It was interesting that in the report, it also called out the plans for the new stadium, so making it extremely concrete without any clarity on financing as of yet, which you wouldn't expect, but they will be shopping that around to every private equity fund and private market bank on the planet, and maybe some public investment funds as well. Maybe some of the nicer ones. I don't know whether the Norwegian Public Investment Fund would like to finance a stadium. It's probably unlikely, but
Well, it's a relatively stable annuity.
Well, it's very stable, incredibly stable. Actually, there was a good report out today. Maybe it was in The Athletic, can't remember where I read it, about Wembley Stadium and just how profitable that is now for the FA. It only took them 20 years to work out how to make money out of that stadium.
And
very good. All right. Good news, I guess. I mean, it's taken a lot of pain to get here for the 400 people or so that lost their jobs at United. I don't think this will be much in the way of a bonus, really, to see United's finances in a healthier state. I mean, obviously, we'd much rather that United had a higher cost base and a higher performance level, but this is, it's hard to go from 0 to 100, and United had to step back a little bit in order to get into a place where we can go further forward. As you say, performance on the pitch is going to be really important, both for Ruben Amorim and our sanity. Like, I don't want to be moaning every week. I'm sure listeners don't want to hear us moaning every week either, but also for the finances next season. But yeah, should be exciting times. Well, when United do the deal for Kylian Mbappe later this summer, no, probably we will be back to analyse the finances, and then maybe Brian Mbumo will be on the books, and we'll get a sense of what his real wage is. And Luke Edwards can either be crowing to all of us that he was right, or can eat some shit, which is much more likely. And on that note, Jamie, subprime goals on Substack, Blue Sky, Twitter. Are you on Blue Sky? You're on Blue
I am,
Sky.
yes.
Yeah. Go check out your Substack. It's always full of golden nuggets on the financial side of things. Listeners, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Ed. Till next time.